Hello and welcome to the Raptors Show, powered by DoorDash on Sportsnet 590 The Fan. I'm your host, Will Lou. Reminder, we are streaming live on Sportsnet's YouTube channel, airing live on Sportsnet's 360 Monday to Friday between 2 and 3 p.m. So to people watching on TV and also on YouTube, hello. And I am joined by the Fan Morning Show's Blake Murphy, producer. Hit it.
Blake Murphy.
Doesn't startle me anymore.
I was going to say, yeah.
Scared when it cuts in.
Yeah, you know it's coming. And, people love it. And obviously, shout out producer Derek for coming through with that. Very
Did we do it
realistic.
last week for Thursday?
No.
Did we mix it up? I didn't think so, yeah.
Yeah, I guess it's not that different. I guess we could have got him to imitate LeBron saying Thursday instead of Tuesday. But in any case, Blake, you're here, and we have a riveting game to break down between the Raptors and the Pelicans. But before we even get to that, actually, a quick behind-the-scenes story. I popped in the studio 1:55. You were already here because, you are more professional than me. You're already in the show for my show before I'm here as the host. And you and I were both wearing the same free swag. So can you just take us through the sweater, what you know.
Yeah, this is that Adidas Kyle Lowry Forever Home.
Mm.
For anyone on YouTube or watching on TV, you can see it.
Yeah, on the back
This
it says.
is it. Yeah, I'm not going to stand up
whole
and turn
bunch of
around
records.
because I'll trip over my cords and everything. But it's it was embarrassing.
It was embarrassing.
I guess it wasn't embarrassing because only the two of us saw it until you brought it up now. But
That's true. But I did take a photo of the two of us, which I
Yeah.
may or may not put on the timeline later.
Will Lou fits.
Honestly, that's where it will go. That's where it will fit. No, luckily I had an extra sweater at the office, so we wouldn't be doing this.
That's all right. I could have
father-son
popped
thing
this
for
off
real.
and short little Julian from Trailer Park Boys black T-shirt on underneath. But that's we'll keep that behind the paywall.
Yeah, there you go. Also, Alex left a producer note here. You know what? I'm going to leave this for the end of the first segment because it does have something to do with the broadcast last night.
Okay.
But let's first talk about that game that we saw yesterday on
Do
Sportsnet.
we have to?
Unfortunately, this is the Raptors show, so we do have to review every game that comes up, including when the Raptors lose 120-90 against the Pelicans. My notes here say, this is that I wrote last night, give me one positive from the game, Blake. Give me one positive.
Fred is on pace for a top 10 three-point shooting season of all time?
Okay. Like in NBA history all time or like your Raptors all
by
time?
by volume in NBA history.
Wow.
He would the current pace he's on, he'd finish 7th.
Oh.
With 293, I think is what I calculated last night, and that's pricing in a couple missed games at the same rate he's missed games so far. And then that probably won't rank 7th by the end of the year because Steph will beat it, and who knows, a couple other guys could pass it, or Fred could miss more time. But yeah, as things stand right now, he's on pace to have the 7th highest volume three-point make season in league history. And he went 4 of 9 last night, so I'd say we could pull that as a positive.
Okay. Yeah. I agree with you. I had Fred as my first star from yesterday's game. I thought, obviously, the Pelicans were playing a lot of drop defense, which is to be expected when you have JV as your starting center. And so when the center is dropping back, you do want to set a good screen, and there's an opportunity for guards who can pull up like Fred to take some of those shots. And he did a good job of that, I thought, throughout the game, but definitely not enough to sort of make the Pelicans come out of their defense. And I think as the game went on, the Pelicans got really tight defensively. To be honest, they just look like a much improved team in general. I think Herb Jones is playing well for them. JV, even though he is not defensively flexible, is definitely very effective when you keep him parked in the lane, standing at the basket all game. It's just genuinely hard to score on a 7-footer like that. Plus, you have Ingram as a help defender. I thought even CJ McCollum did a good job playing within the team scheme. So, the Pelicans just had the Raptors stuck all night. And I'm happy you gave me that positive because the biggest negative, if we're going to take one from the game, is that they only had 8 assists as a team.
Whew.
It's one of those where I had to stop myself, double check that on 2 different sites to make sure that 8 is really just 8. And then I went on StatMuse and searched up immediately what's the fewest assists in a game ever in Raptors, history or whatever. And apparently the Raptors had 2 games in the span of a month back in 1999 where they had 6 assists.
Jeez.
Twice in a month, like February 24th and March 13th. 2 games, 6 assists.
Not the sexiest of basketball I looked at one point. I think they only had one in the first quarter, maybe. And I looked, and
Oh
you
my
know,
God.
not to make this a gambling show, but I had Pascal's over 4.5 assists. And at one point, I'm like, is the team gonna hit Pascal's over 4.5
They
assists?
got to refund you in those situations.
Yeah. Like how soccer has like the boring match refund. If it's 0-0 and you
Mm,
lose, you get your bet back.
that's
Need that for an ugly game. If the team has fewer than 10 assists, everything's scrapped. It was bad. And like obviously part of that is non-Fred shooters shot 4 of 25, but the ball was also like really sticky, and it wasn't great. Like I didn't think Siakam's game was as bad as 7 of 19 necessarily, but Gary missed an awful lot of
oh my
like
God.
pull up mid range stuff or one step to the side stuff. Scottie Barnes had 0 assists, which even if you can live with the 2 of 10 field goal shooting, I think the 0 assists is a good indicator of, hey, the ball wasn't moving and Scottie wasn't getting involved. Because I found a little bit, and I'd have to pull the numbers to see if this is like actually accurate or if it's just anecdotal, but the more assists he's getting, I think it's like a harbinger for how well the ball is moving, because he's kind of the 5th guy in that starting unit where he gets his touches and he gets involved when the ball finds him. It's not nearly as much scripted stuff. So him having a 0 and a 1 in assists the last 2 games, I think is a red flag about the offense in general.
Yeah, and I think, look, obviously the Raptors went on an 8-game win streak, and then they lost by 1 point at a play at the end where OG gets blocked on a putback attempt. They could have very easily won that game. Um, but I think there have been some signs that sort of the team has sort of come apart in the sense that like they're starting to just show a little bit of wear and tear. I think obviously the OKC game, they were always going to beat OKC in Houston, but there were some lazy habits that were displayed there. Obviously, those teams don't play defense whatsoever, especially Houston. So the Raptors were able to still win comfortably. I thought against the Nuggets, obviously Pascal played out of his mind, but really there were some quiet performances from Gary and OG in particular. And then this game, they just get steamrolled, period. And then look, this is a game where I don't think anybody really played that well. Even Fred, who we did compliment, ended up leaving the game.
Maybe Boucher, but even that, some of that was, once the game was out of hand a little bit.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I credit Chris too, I think, because, the Raptors also shuffled their lineup yesterday, and we'll definitely get to our impressions of Thad Young. He played 12 minutes for his Raptors debut last night, and we will do probably 20 minutes of breakdown on that. I don't know how that works. But let's talk about the rotations there too, because I think it was interesting to see how Nick would manage, right? I remember asking you this when you came on last Thursday, right after the trade deadline, and I asked you, like, how is Nick going to manage having essentially 4, not centers, because, like, you know what, the Raptors don't like to specifically say their positions. There's more about roles, but functionally speaking, 4 non-shooters who sort of play big, which are centers. They have 4 centers coming off their bench. And yesterday, Kem Birch was the first sub. Then it was Precious and Chris Boucher. And then it was Thad Young. Like, that's 4 guys who aren't shooting for you. And I think that for Nick, he's obviously going to have to manage the rotation. So what did you make of Nick's first attempt at sort of trying to make all that work?
It needs some tweaking. And this was the first time in a while we heard him concede the point after the game as well, where, his talk was more about the matchup in particular, coming off of games against Jokic and Valanciunas, rather than what I think the real issue is. And that's that you only have 8 or 9 guys that you trust, and 3 of them are centers coming off the bench. And that's just a hard way to work a rotation. And we can relitigate some of the stuff we talked about at the start of the season or throughout the year about, hey, maybe Gary Trent's offense is best suited for a second unit. Maybe Scottie Barnes, because he has the familiarity coming off the bench, and could play more of a playmaking role and a higher usage role in bench units. Like you can make a case for a couple guys. Nobody, like, these aren't the best terms, but nobody like deserves to lose their starting spot on merit. All 5 of those players have been good. It's just about occasionally with the matchups, would you rather have one of those guys subbing in 4 or 5 minutes into the first and third instead of subbing out 4 or 5 minutes into the first and third? And I think something that's instructive is they go on this 8-game win streak. They drop the last 2. Most of the team-wide metrics are moving in the right direction, right? Like they're doing well as a team. That starting 5 has now played 299 minutes together, and they have played it exactly neutral. Totally even, 674 to 674 in those 299 minutes. And if you look at, I think it's 17 games those guys have been 18 games those guys have been available together. That includes most of the last 10. So what you're seeing is they're a roughly neutral unit and slightly positive over this stretch. Not some of that's early season stuff, but as the team has been really good and as the team has put up better metrics, that they've kind of lagged behind as a fivesome. And I don't think that means that can't be a good unit. I just wonder if maybe 17 minutes a game playing against no matter what the matchup is maybe not, the most fair sample to evaluate them in or the most, reasonable deployment. So I get why they're doing it. Those are the five guys who, if you look at this roster, like they're the five most important players. They're the five guys you would like to give a lot of reps to see if they can play together longer term. I just think if at some point the focus shifts to, hey, we got to win enough games to make the playoffs, then you're looking at maybe tweaking it, because lineups with four of those guys and Kem or Precious or even Chris Boucher, actually the Kem lineups haven't been that great, but you take four of those guys with Boucher or even Precious and they've been pretty good.
Okay.
And the Kem ones, I think you could see why it'd work. Like he checks in last night and you get it right away.
Yeah.
Low usage guy, does the little things, a little more stable defensively, sets some good screens, doesn't need the ball. So yeah, I think you'll get there. Nick Nurse made it seem like maybe that's going to be a matchup look for them moving forward. Tomorrow will be interesting because it's Towns, who is a little bit more perimeter oriented as far as 7-foot scorers go, but he's a big body. So
he can definitely play in the post if they choose to, I think, depending on the matchup.
So I'll be interested to see what they do there, and if it's a tweak there or it's something they sit with over those 9 days off during the All-Star break.
Yeah, that's definitely very interesting. I think one thing that, especially on this topic of lineups, because, as you mentioned, that starting group, 300 minutes plus 0.
Yep.
This is just like a sneaking suspicion I had, so I want to look this up. That group in the first half is minus 31. Second half plus overtime is plus 31. Now, of course, that's a very small,
we're cutting a small sample into smaller component samples, but
I do think they get off to poor starts. Like, that's not a surprise to me when that starting group has poor starts. Last night was a great example of that, right? They really couldn't guard well. The Pelicans, I think, shot 9 of 12 to start the game. And offensively, it definitely works. I think that's definitely their best offensive lineup. But also at times, they not say suffer from like guys sort of specifically taking turns, but like they kind of feel it out as the game goes on. And then second half, I think they do actually do quite well, as the sort of numbers have suggested here. I think, okay, so with the center lineups thing, I mean, if you did have to take out one of those guys from the starting group, and by the way, as when, we have talked to Bobby Webster and he was on your show, and, Masai has also talked about it, like they clearly value this core group of 5 guys, right? So it's not like they necessarily even feel close to changing the way their starting 5 is. Like, those are their 5 most important players. However, if you were to sort of change it up, who would you be taking out to sort of bring in that extra center, which is sort of bringing more of a traditional balance, let's say, to the lineup?
You're right in that they haven't done that a ton, right? Like, you look at those 5 guys, the 5 starters. Gary Trent has come off the bench 1 game. That's it for the whole season. Otherwise, they've all started.
Game 1 of the season, which I still don't understand why Goran started that game, but okay.
Otherwise, they've all started every game. So Nick Nurse has talked a lot over the years about wanting that starting lineup flexibility and wanting guys to be comfortable in multiple roles. And this is something I warned about this year too, when he was talking about it again, is when it's come down to it, every single season he's had a set starting 5 that he likes to go to. Mm-hmm. And you can make a compelling case for that. Like, matchups change and stuff, but it's good to have role certainty for guys. It's good for everyone to know what to expect and what's coming. And, for your prep for a game on Monday to be similar to your prep for your game on Wednesday. Those things have benefits. Having said that, I think a shift of Scottie Barnes to the bench on occasion wouldn't be the worst thing. I think
he is usually the first sub that comes out.
He's usually the first sub that comes out. He spent a decent amount of time at Florida State coming off the bench. I think that even if he's in tremendous shape and he's been really, really impressive as a rookie, 36 minutes a game, like he's playing more minutes as a rookie, more minutes than any rookie since Dame. That's how far back you have to go. Wow. It's been like a decade since So I'm not even advocating for cutting his minutes that much. Like maybe it gets it down from 36 to 32. Tyler Hero's leading the league in minutes per game as bench guys with 32. And then there are a couple other guys around like 29, 28. So you could still get him his 30 minutes a game or so. But the combination of experience in that role, fatigue that I think we're seeing, like he's played 2.9 times as many minutes this year as last year.
Yeah.
And we're not even at the All-Star break yet.
I think he played more minutes in the NBA this season than he did all of college, I think, by November.
Yeah. And it's
So-
almost triple now. And
Yeah,
we
yeah.
had Coach
Okay.
David Thorpe on the Fan Morning Show this morning, and we talked about that a little bit. And he said, like, it's not a rookie wall, it's a wall. Like, this is a grind for everyone. And by this point in the season, guys need like the mental break and the physical break. So for a guy like Scottie, who's being asked to do a lot and is having a lot come at him from like mental standpoint too, right? Like, this is obviously a physical challenge, but the team is being like, hey, guard this guy tonight. Hey, you're guarding center. You're going to play defensively, you're a center and pick and roll tonight. Hey, you're going to have the ball in your hands a lot this game because we're playing against a lesser opponent. It's awesome that they're getting him all those reps. And I think you can make a case that further to that goal is, hey, bring him off the bench once in a while. Like if he's the guy that, if you have to move someone to the bench, have it be him. And then those units are a little bit more his, both in terms of getting him more playmaking reps, getting him more usage, and also kind of creating an identity for those groups where the best version of the bench units have generally included Boucher, Achua, and Banton in some configuration. And you add Scottie Barnes to that, and you see the identity of that group, right? Where they're going to struggle to score. Sure, absolutely. So did the bench mob. But those groups, and I think good second units, especially young second units, it's really helpful to have an identity you can lean on. And that foursome with whether it's Thad, whether it's another starter, whatever, having the, hey, we're going to defend like crazy, use our length, and then we're going to run in transition. And it's going to be a little chaotic, but Scottie Barnes can improvise. And Delano Banton can improvise. Like both of those guys have been better as playmakers this year in improvisational situations. So I don't know. Those are the arguments for it. You could say Gary Trent too, just because, hey, the second unit needs scoring. Pascal, OG, and Fred are not going to the bench. That's pretty much
yeah, we know that.
Yeah.
I
So,
don't think. By the way, I think Gary's played well enough that he's in that group too for me.
yeah,
he's not moving to the bench.
So, and then you're out of options, right? Then you're down to Scottie.
Well-
And again, it's not a you deserve to go to the bench thing. It's a we want to try something different and see how this looks thing.
Yeah, I mean, it's also like a like for like substitution.
Yeah.
He's the guy playing center, right? And I think especially when you look at, given how much Pascal has emerged, and Pascal's playing phenomenal, right? All-star level basketball, even though he hasn't been named as an all-star reserve just yet. Adam Silver, you coward. You have Fred obviously already making, the all-star team itself. You have Gary also emerging as a legitimate third option a lot of the times. Honestly, OG was supposed to be that third option. Sometimes he is, although he's hit a cold patch here as well. When you have that many demands in the starting five, like Scottie is usually the guy who has the least offense and the least shots. And if you look at, like, for example, the way they were trying to beat the Pelicans yesterday, obviously they're asking Fred and Gary to play a lot of pick and roll, right, against that drop defense. You set a good screen. There should be some space for a guy to pull up, whether at the three-point line ideally or maybe even get to the mid-range area. Fred did it effectively. Gary did not, whatever, right? But that's the strategy against the drop back big. The other way to beat it is like, okay, you set a good screen and then the guy rolls. There's a lot of space for him to short roll into because the bigs dropped all the way back. You hit him with the pocket pass. Scottie's there. And then he's putting up these little push floaters, which we know he can hit, which we know he practices. But essentially what you're asking him to do is like, can you do the Kem Birch role for us in the starting five? And you have Kem Birch at the bench. So I don't know. I mean, to me, I still think that in terms of just like upside, I think probably long term, you probably want to see as many reps as possible with that group. And that's where the challenge of balancing developing and winning come into play. I think maybe in terms of like the ideal situation is you can do similar to like what they did with Serge and Mark. They would kind of change it up. Or I guess actually with Serge and JV.
Mark never really came off the bench except for I think his first two games.
He came off the bench for like at least a week or two. I don't know.
Okay.
There's a lot. Anyway, I don't remember that season all that clearly outside of the championship.
Yeah, why would you remember that season? I need that brain space for, Ben Uzo's stat lines and 6 assist games in 1999 and stuff.
Yeah, that's the season known as when Jeremy Lin won a championship for the Toronto Raptors for me.
Yeah.
So that's how it's filed as.
Man, 10-year anniversary yesterday, eh?
I know. Well, I mean, that was a very conflicted day, just for me personally. But I guess also I did not lose on both fronts. At least only lost on one of those. Yeah, so the center thing I think is tough. I also think, look, do you also consider cutting one of the centers out of the rotation, at least for the time being?
The
Because
issue with that is, who is it? Because Kem is owed the most money,
yeah,
and you have invested the most in him.
sure. It's
He's
not a
been the
significant investment though.
No, it's not, but it's something.
Yeah, okay.
And he's been the worst of the three, at least lately.
Yeah.
I think Boucher has clearly been the best of the three.
Yeah, and he can play 4. The other ones can't play 4.
Yeah,
at all.
Boucher's numbers actually next to another center are pretty good.
Yeah.
It's he looks like we group him in there because he can play some small ball center,
I mean, he
and
was
just
playing
like
3 last night.
yeah, and like he's endemic of like what the issue is with the rotations in general. But yeah, he's not a problem on his own. So I would, it would be tough. I think Kem would be the guy to come out for a little bit. You saw him not in the rotation for a good stretch there with the knee stuff.
Yep.
And it didn't exactly, like, here's the trouble. Maybe it's different with Thad Young, but what they ran into when Kem was out was like that Kem absence felt huge because suddenly they only had 7 guys.
Sure, yeah.
So to take one of your top 9 and be like, we're going to shelf him because it's too hard to bring 3 bigs off the bench, 4 if you include that as a big and not kind of the wing that he's going to have to play on this team.
He's a big man.
I know, but he's not going to be deployed like that.
Yeah.
So,
Some
yeah, I don't
redundancies.
know if you can afford to really cut one of your top 9 guys from the rotation for positional balance when you don't have another guy to step. Like, you just don't trust that many guys if you're Nick Nurse.
Yeah, fair enough. But also I think at the same time, this is also the front office is giving him a situation. I mean, look, he can choose to start another guy, but clearly the top 5 are the top 5. Regardless if you bring them off the bench, one of them off the bench or not, the top 5 is the top 5. Ultimately, the next 4 guys in your rotation at the current moment are all functionally centers. And I know, the front office likes to say, well, it's, we don't look at it like positions. We look at it more in terms of what you can do on the court and who you can guard. And I think defensively, I don't think there's going to be too many issues with that outside of the fact that they're probably not going to score a ton, so they're going to have to guard a lot in transition. But, like, half-court defense, I trust it. Like, even if you told me Boucher is guarding a 3 for the game, I think you can do it. It's not a problem. But offensively, that is where the troubles are going to come in, because I was looking at
who's
yesterday.
spacing, right? Like Precious is confident, but he's a 29-30% three-point shooter. Thad Young's never really shot the ball super well beyond some small sample corner stuff. Boucher will let it go, but he's not, like, the percentages aren't really there. So what do we, and like Kem Birch has got the summer 3 once in a while, the old Amir Johnson slow release corner 3. And then even Banton's had some nice shooting games in the G League, but nothing at sample. So
Well, nothing that people are actually reacting to. Like, what we saw against the Pelicans was they first off, they were already like, let's pack the paint.
Yeah.
Right. We know what we're going to do. Let's pack the paint. We'll try to, be aggressive against Fred. We'll definitely be super aggressive against Pascal. It was very clear from the start, OG and Gary did not really have it. So it's like, okay, we don't even have to guard them as much. But, of course, you still do respect them. You don't want to give them open threes. Let them get going.
OG not having it on a night where Devontae Graham and CJ McCollum were occasionally on him was a real swing.
He didn't even touch the ball. But I think it's not even like, okay, the offense froze him out. I think he's just like wasn't getting the ball because he looked really
Well, it wasn't
tired.
moving at all, right? Like,
he needs the All-Star break.
Yeah,
I hope
they
OG
all
goes
do.
somewhere.
They all do. Like, this is the thing, is we talk about it, and whether you want to gripe about it or whether you want to gloss past it or whatever, the fact that this is an historic usage of 5 guys at the top of your rotation is, like, I think even if you're not worried about the fatigue element, it's like, it's very fascinating from a basketball perspective of like, how much can this work? But yeah, this is a team that needs these 9 days off.
Yeah.
A fair amount. So,
but I mean, okay, look, what I'm trying to say is, when you have a situation like that, the Pelicans are really going to, clamp down the paint, especially if they play 3 centers at once, which they did in the first quarter. Kem, Precious, Chris Boucher. Not saying that all the shots were bad. I think Gary got a wide open look that he couldn't knock down. But, like, over a 3-minute period, they literally went scoreless. And they gave up a 7-0 run. And a lot of that was actually Jose Alvarado just breaking past the defense and drawing fouls or whatever, right? Then they go to the bench lineups. And usually the bench lineup that has worked really well of late is Pascal, OG, Scottie, Delano, and Precious or Boucher. But regardless, kind of the same kind of deal there. You have a center who can rim run and get you offensive rebounds. That group has worked great of late. And in order to put in Thad, they were able to make some concessions. And the one that had to make the biggest concession was Delano, who didn't even check in the first half, right? So, and then there, even when you go to that lineup, that I mean, even before the spacing wasn't ideal, but especially when OG doesn't have it, and also the rest of the guys don't fully know how to play with each other, the spacing last night was just so bad. Like it was easy for the Pelicans to guard the Raptors because they could just keep five guys within the paint.
And what do you want to do when you don't have great spacing, right? It's like if a guy's a non-shooting threat, you want him doing some other sort of action that is creating an advantage somewhere else, or in CJ Miles's old the way he would always frame it is carry the threat.
Yeah.
You got to be threatening to do something, right?
Right.
And it's something where I think Scottie Barnes is really good at this, where even when he's not involved, he's looking for kind of those impromptu screens to set and stuff like that. He's just looking for something to do. And you look at that 5-man unit, and it's like, or let's say the 5 bench guys that they're going to use in general, and the 3 kind of ways that you can have value on offense when you can't space the floor is have the ball in your hands, be a screener, or be a cutter. And you can't, all 5 guys can't assume those 3. Like I come back to the play the other night where it wasn't last night, it was a couple games ago now, but OG is posting up, Precious is in the dunker, and then Boucher and Banton both cut into the paint at the same time. And it's like, man, like that's what those second units are going to look like all the time. So you could put the ball in Delano's hands, or you could put the ball in Thad's hands, and you could have one of those guys screen and maybe one guy cutting or whatever, but like they can't all do that. And the difference between, there's a huge gap between, hey, this guy can knock down a corner 3 if he's left open and punish you for leaving him there. Like that's the spot Precious and Thad and those guys are at. Like they're not complete non-shooters, but the gap between that and a defense adjusts to the threat of you shooting is wide. And the only 2, maybe 3 guys on the team that have that are Fred, Gary, and maybe OG. And even OG's having kind of a down shooting year. So yeah, I don't know. There's not you're not bringing Fred off the bench. So there's not a stagger pattern that gives you spacing unless you want Svi pulling up from deep on 4-on-1s again.
Which he did.
He sure did.
In the garbage time last night. You know what? Look, we just spent 27 minutes talking about this. I think Pascal summed it up even better, which he just said. Terrible game. It was just one of those nights, and that's exactly what happened. So on this, we're going to take a break. On the other side, we are going to talk about Thad Young and his Raptors debut. We're going to talk a little bit about just wrapping up the trade deadline. There were some details in terms of trades the Raptors didn't ultimately make, and we'll get to all that on the other side with Blake Murphy. So I've been your host, Willou. You've been listening to The Raptors Show, powered by DoorDash on Sportsnet 590, The Fan. Welcome back to the Raptors Show on Sportsnet 590 The Fan, powered by DoorDash. I'm your host, Will Lou. I continue to be joined by the Fan Morning Show's Blake Murphy. Blake, we have to talk about Thad Young making his Raptors debut. 12 minutes last night, 4 points, 4 rebounds, and assists, a steal. Clearly, obviously, new to the team, very new to the team. Literally, they haven't practiced yet with that. So it's tough to throw a guy in that situation. But yeah, what did you make of the debut? Anything that sort of stood out in terms of like awkward moments? Anything that maybe intrigued you in terms of like, oh, wow, he has a spin move too? You know?
Didn't his spin move get picked off though?
No, he had a spin move in the lane, the fourth quarter when the Raptors are down 30.
Oh yeah, but his first stint, he lost one on a spin move, right? Like he was trying to initiate from the top and lost. I think Alvarado picked him off.
Yeah,
but who didn't Alvarado pick off last night?
Yeah, he was pretty good yesterday.
He's good, man.
Yeah, he's like a Patrick Beverley type.
Him and Herb Jones, big draft Twitter wins.
I guess so. Yeah.
Herb Jones is great.
Herb Jones is great. Yeah.
So I didn't see a ton from Thad that was particularly surprising. Like he definitely looks like a guy who has been out of an NBA rotation, and by his own admission, he expects a little bit of rust, and he's been training more like it's the off season. So you're going to need a little, like he's also such a feel-based player at this point that he probably does need a little bit, like you need to give him a grace period to learn the guys around him and stuff. But I did think that you see some of what he brings right away, right? Like he has 3 offensive rebounds, and it's like, okay, like that's obviously a skill that he has that isn't just size and athleticism. He has a little bit of the, you know, he probably looks up to Justin Champagny trying to emulate that nose for the offensive rebound. He made one nice read. He came up with the steal. And you see like the worry in my mind with a 33-year-old who hasn't played a lot this year is when you drop him back in there, what's the defense going to be like? And I didn't really see anything to be concerned about. I mean, maybe there's concern if he ends up having to guard 2s or something like that in those giant lineups, but he looked mostly fine.
Yeah, I think for me, watching over the film, and actually someone on Reddit, Raptors Reddit, actually did a great job of just like clipping all the game action, including Thad Young, which was very useful upon the rewatch, because obviously I didn't want to watch the whole game. It was a horrible game to rewatch. So I went back and watched about 10 minutes of just Thad Young playing, right? And to me, a couple of things. Number one, the spacing is going to be awkward. I think we kind of expected that. I think for him, there was a lot of like impromptu, okay, you know, the dribble handoffs will come set a screen for Pascal here or there, maybe got a mismatch. Like all that stuff, I think he actually has a good intuitive sense for. Like it didn't even feel out of sync. That's generally how the Raptors like to play. Now, the issue is like when you do set that screen for the switch, generally speaking, he's going to be guarded by a center. So Pascal's not really going to get too much of an advantage there. It's not like when Fred comes over and sets a screen that maybe you introduce a big small matchup with Fred's guy going on to Pascal. But ultimately with that, I think there will be some spacing issues just because of the fact that I don't think he really wants to shoot it. Now, I think maybe, again, like when the team gets more comfortable, I think obviously he'll know where his shot's going to come from more. He's not just taking an odd 3 here or there with no rhythm. And as you mentioned, you know, he's been on the shelf, which, by the way, this begs the question, like, what do these players, exiled NBA players, what do they do and where do they, like, go to stay ready? Because there should be, like, a 31st NBA team that is just for, like, John Wall, Ben Simmons, Goran Dragic, Thad Young,
it's the G League Ignite. Amir Johnson and Jarrett Jack down there getting reps with Scoot and Deshaun Nix and stuff. So,
no, they should literally have some sort of thing for them to, like, at least stay somewhat ready.
Yeah, the issue would be who do you let in? Because Ben Simmons and Goran going wouldn't be the best look. And then you also have to pick a destination.
Miami, apparently.
Yeah, well,
I don't think anyone will complain about Miami.
I agree with your general point, though. Thad's taken 14 shots outside of 10 feet this year, even from, like, the elbow area. If you do a little, you know, even just a little DHO there and it's a keeper for him or something, like, he doesn't want to take that elbow jumper. He hasn't taken much. And maybe that's, you know, that's a Spurs-only shooting split there, but it's not as if he's been a heavy mid-range guy. Like, he took 41 mid-range shots all of last year with Chicago.
Yeah.
And that's why you see, hey, look, it's great. He shoots 68% at the rim. You want that guy around the rim. He's immediately one of the Raptors' best finishers. The issue is going to be, again, with the spacing, how do you get there? So he does have a decent, like, floater range package, but yeah, and this isn't really going to be a Thad thing. It's going to be a how do you figure things out with a bunch of guys who want to shoot from similar spots, and more importantly, don't want to shoot from similar spots.
Yeah.
That's going to be the challenge, because I agree. You saw some of the improvisational stuff right away, right? Like he's very smart, and he knows.
Yeah.
Like already you could see, especially him playing with, you drop him in with really good established players. Like there's a book on Siakam, there's a book on Fred, there's a book on OG. Like I think he knows how to help those guys, and he's going to figure out really quickly how to put those guys in advantageous positions and find his niche if he's dropped in with the starters. It just, that might not be his role, right? Like it's going to be a different learning curve if he's trying to find things for Boucher and Achua and Banton.
Yeah.
Because those guys don't even know where their spots are all the time. And I don't mean
their spots are get the offensive rebound.
Yeah, I don't mean that like negatively. I mean that they're really young guys who right now are a lot of, hey, my baskets are created by hustle or created by someone else. So yeah, there's going to be a learning curve there and a challenge for Thad as a kind of a, a dot connector, but the dots are fluid.
Yeah. Well, I mean, okay, so an example of this would be, I think either second quarter or fourth quarter, to be honest, the whole game was a blur. The Raptors were down 20 the whole time. The Pelicans went to a zone, which is pretty normal. The Raptors bench gets zoned quite a bit. It's a very logical way to defend the Raptors, considering the fact that those lineups are usually Pascal trying to get to the rim. The more pressure you can do that with, in terms of being able to stack bodies with a zone defense, clearly it's a thing that we've already seen used against the Raptors to some pretty good effect, okay? Pelicans put out that zone. Delano has a shot at the top of the floor early in that offense. He gives it up. Wide open three, though. He gives it up. I mean, I guess Alvarado was maybe in the area, maybe can close out, but let's be real. Delano's way taller. It's not even going to see a guy like that. If he wants to shoot it, decides not to shoot it. I'm okay with that first look off because it's like 15, 16 seconds left on the clock. You probably get better than that. So he swings it to Thad, who swings it quickly to Chris Boucher, which is a good example of that dot connecting, right? You want to make that next pass, next read really quickly. Chris catches the ball. He takes a look. He's like, I don't know if I'm the best three-point shooter in this lineup. I'm going to give the ball up too. Back to Thad. And
look at how far Chris Boucher's come.
I know, right? Chris is like, you know what? I don't want this to be clipped on Twitter.com. Okay, so he doesn't do it.
I don't want to have to body Will again.
Don't worry. Interview of the century coming soon. Eventually, actually. This is not going to be the Utah Ramen thing. Like this will actually happen. All right. So Thad gets the ball back for the second time in the possession. He has a look at the three with Alvarado also closing him. Again, he's pretty small, so you can shoot over him if you want to. He decides, that's not my forte. Let me try to get into a dribble move, try to break down the defense on the top of the floor. And that's where, as you described earlier, he goes to that spin move, he gets picked off. And that's about 5 seconds left. And then the Pelicans go the other way and score. Now, some of that is just you don't know your personnel that well at that point, right? You don't know the offense as well at that point. But also at the same time, you can see future scenarios where those three guys all each turn down shots. And so that leaves you with only 2 guys on the floor, maybe, who will want to shoot. And when you look at the start of the fourth quarter, who was out there with the Raptors, it was Pascal, Champagny, Thad,
Banton and Boucher.
Yeah. So that's actually 5 non-shooters. I mean, Pascal is a shooter. He's a creator. He's a guy who can definitely make a shot. And, obviously he wasn't hitting the 3 well last night, but nobody was. But essentially, though, he's not looking to create from the 3-point line. He's not looking to pull out from the 3 all that often, if at all, especially of late. You're just going to run into some significant spacing issues. So I think on that front, how do you think some of the lineups can be optimized, or even just in terms of like Thad's role, right? Because he does have that passing ability, the cutting ability I thought was really good. He worked a little nice 2-man game with OG for a 3. Like, what are some of the lineups that can work, and also maybe what are some of the actions that just based on Thad Young's skill set could really help solve or at least sort of mitigate some of the spacing issues?
I think in terms of actions, you want him involved around the ball, right? Because he makes smart plays and he turns small advantages into slightly larger ones for teammates. I think you could look and, some of the corner action stuff that you did with Marc Gasol, like Thad isn't as large as Marc Gasol. He doesn't have the same ability to kind of take one step and pass over a defense and survey them like that, but he can make decent reads from the elbow and from even deeper into the corner there. So you could see some stuff like that. You could honestly, he probably immediately becomes the team's second best screener after Birch.
Okay, I can see that, yeah.
Maybe you could give it to OG when OG screening's on, but like certainly he's a more effective screener than Precious and Boucher.
Yeah.
So right away you can use him like that a little bit. I wonder a little bit too if like some of the old Rondé playbook where they'd have him run lower pick and rolls to leverage the fact that he can pass a little bit.
And by that you mean the screen is being set in the paint, sometimes just above the restricted area.
And I think like, yeah, some of the Kyle ones were comically low, but I think what you do there is you take two non-shooters and you put that action down low. And if the defense wants to drop against it, you immediately have a floater range option, right? Like you're not asking Thad to pull up from 3.
And he has that touch.
You're asking Thad to let that floater go from 10 feet, because the issue if he just faces up or the play you just described, like I brought up the play, look at this when Thad tries to get into the paint.
Oh my God.
It's just
okay, just to describe this, because again, it is a radio show. There are 5 red jerseys all in the paint, all essentially like within an arm's distance. Like if they all chose to link arms, they can and form like a star.
And his so Thad's 2 options when he kind of starts this attack, and this is before Alvarado kind of jars the ball loose. There's 3.4 seconds left of the shot clock. He's got Siakam close enough that CJ McCollum probably picks off the pass and goes pick 6. And then he's got a difficult pass to Delano Banton in the corner,
who just turned down a 3 earlier in the possession, a cleaner look.
And again, 3.4 seconds left of the shot clock. So this is the kind of spacing stuff you're probably going to be looking at in those units. And again, this is why the defense in those groups, and why when we talk about identity of those units in the first half of the show, that's going to be so important, because this is what a lot of your half court sets are going to look like. You gotta get those transition buckets. It's going to be transition or bust probably offensively.
Well, okay. I think for me, you know what actually is interesting to me is I want to see them bringing Thad as that first sub eventually. You know, of late, as we mentioned in the first half, you know, they've been trying to bring the center into that position. I think that actually defensively can play big a little bit. Obviously not a true 7-footer by any means, because he's not, but like physical enough down low. He's guarded centers quite a bit, especially in Chicago and stuff like that. I was watching a lot of the film. They were putting him a lot on big guys who were much bigger than him, but he was able to positionally play tough. You know, they were asking a lot of him. But I thought he did a good job. You bring in Thad as that first sub, because I do want to see what his ability in terms of connecting dots can do for the starting 5. He knows his role. He definitely can play in that pick and roll scenario, as you mentioned. He knows how to make the next pass. And I think with the more shooting you put around him, and this is probably a general statement for anybody, but like, especially for a guy like that who can pick out the right pass and make a move and score a little bit in the middle, like that seems to me like a pretty ideal fit as terms of as your 6th man. Essentially what you can do is take what works well with your starting 5, which is the fact that you have scorers all over and you're, you know, a lot of shooters in the starting 5. Second unit, obviously, literally no shooters. But you can kind of extend the life of that starting group and sort of amplify what that group does well. But of course, you're not also going to essentially how many minutes can Thad realistically play with the starting 5? We're talking about maybe like 6 minutes a game.
Which is still notable, though, because, again, those starters haven't been super effective. So, yeah, I think you see some of, and you want OG and Scottie to still be getting these reps because it's important, but you see sometimes how intriguing they look when, you know, hey, the odd time the starters get zoned and one of those guys is at the nail, or when they're the short roller and they're kicking out from that free throw line area. Well, that is, you know, kind of what you hope Scottie and OG. Well, Scottie, you probably have higher hopes in terms of playmaking, but, you know, if OG turned into a Thad level passer in those situations, you'd be thrilled, right?
Sure,
so you can drop that in there. And this is kind of what I meant off the top of the segment is Thad is a guy who he's going to have a bit of Gasol to him where he's going to look better with better players because then you're connecting better dots, right? Like the old glue guy thing. Well, gluing disparate pieces together that don't fit, there's not really a lot of value to the glue there. You glue pieces that fit really snugly together and you know, can find kind of a sum is greater than the parts thing, then there's a little more value there. Now, the challenge becomes if that is your first guy off the bench, then you've okay, well now you've got of your 10-man rotation, 3 of them are bigs who are coming off the bench and aren't the first guy off the bench. You're kind of, so that's where, you know, if you want to make an argument that one of Birch, Achua, Boucher, probably Birch, the way things have gone the last little bit, need to sit down a little bit for this rotation to make sense. That's probably where you make the argument is, you want Thad coming in early and then whoever comes out runs a second unit with Precious and Banton and Boucher. And those, tiny, tiny, tiny samples, but I looked at the break at that Banton Barnes, Boucher Achua foursome, like plus 17 in 25 minutes.
Yeah, no, I think they look good together, which, yeah, I mean, if this means Kem has to sit, I mean, it's not like the end of the world if Kem has to sit. I mean, realistically, you've added a front court upgrade, and you probably upgrade over one of your front court guys, and Kem has been their least performing front court guy. Maybe it's not his fault because he's had the injuries, but that is essentially what I'm saying. Is
it's tough.
You're not gonna have 4 centers come off your bench. That's just not real. No team in NBA history has done that.
It's tough because Kem Birch is, of those 3 guys, of him, Precious, and Boucher, he's probably the guy you'd want most with the starters because, again, low usage, knows his role, defensive floor, good screen setter. But yeah, if you want to use Thad in that role, Thad's probably a better player at this point. Yeah. So, I mean, we'll see. We probably need to see more than 12 minutes of Thad,
of course,
not in the Spurs thing. But like last year's version of Thad with the Bulls, who at the deadline every contender wanted to get their hands on, that player was definitely better than Kem Birch. So, there's probably a reasonable case he still is.
Yeah, well, I mean, of course, we're jumping ahead. We're not saying this right now. I think obviously there's a way to handle these situations. You got to let it sort of play out first. But I also think that logically, when you sort of see how this could play out, this is kind of the direction that we'll start to see.
I have a question for you in terms of Wednesday night's game against the Timberwolves. So last game, and then they're off until the following Friday.
Yeah.
Do you lean a little more toward this experimental stuff and Thad specifically so that you have tape for a guy like Thad to look at over that long stretch? Because you're not practicing during that stretch either, right? Like,
well, maybe you get in 1 or 2 practices.
Yeah, you generally they get back together on the Wednesday.
Yeah,
and like Pascal and Fred won't have to be there. Maybe Scottie doesn't have to be there because of All-Star weekend. Sure, and then Thursday you do a full session, and then Friday you're playing because they're back on the road, so they probably just meet up on the road or whatever. But do you lean a little more toward, hey, we want to try to get that 20 minutes so he's got some stuff to work from?
I would. Yeah. I would for sure. I also think that the matchup makes sense for him to do so. The Timberwolves are pretty perimeter oriented, and I think that you're probably going to need that there. But look, listen, he played 12 minutes. He said after the game, quote, "You're trying to learn 5 positions in one day offensively." Yeah, I mean, clearly I think there'll be improvements, especially just even without alleviating some of the spacing issues. Some of these things will naturally work itself out. All right, to wrap the show, we have a couple of loose ends from the trade deadline. Shams, appearing on the Real Ones podcast, noted a couple things for the Raptors. Number one, so apparently the Raptors considered Porzingis. This has sort of been widely reported as well. Unclear in terms of which side, whether Dallas or Toronto, were the ones that ultimately said no, and Porzingis gets moved to Washington for basically a nothing package, straight dump with Spencer Dinwiddie and Davis Bertans, who I think both are relatively bad money, or at best minimum even money. But they clearly just wanted to get rid of Porzingis, so I think probably Toronto said no on this, yeah?
Well, yeah, you described it as straight dump in terms of what the trade was for salary. It's how I would describe my reaction to the Porzingis idea as well. That's a straight dump. That is no thanks.
Not healthy, not flexible defensively.
I'm skeptical that this is accurate from the Raptors side. Shams is my guy. Like I'm sure he heard this and it was put out there. I'm sure the Knicks and the Mavericks kicked it around, and maybe the Raptors indulged in the call and stuff like that.
I mean, the Raptors are always going to be indulging in the call because they have a big expiring contract. Yeah,
that contract, that injury red tape, the book on him in general,
not good.
I'd be very surprised.
Yeah, didn't fit. I didn't think that fit. Yeah, he makes, I think, there's a $36 million player option for the year OG and Gary, or not OG and Gary, Fred and Gary go into free agency. So that's a hurdle. That's a big hurdle, along with other things. Okay, Sean's also mentioned Tim Horton Tucker. All right, that's why I know it's Taylor Horton Tucker, but it just naturally flows. We're in Canada. Okay, Tim Horton Tucker and Nerlens Noel was potentially coming to Toronto in a 3-way trade. This is sort of breaking the night before trade deadline.
This was the Cam Reddish one? Yeah. So he was also involved. He was going to LA?
The framework was Lakers get Cam Reddish, Alec Burks. Raptors get Nerlens Noel, THT. Knicks get Dragic, Lakers second. Apparently Kem Birch was going somewhere in this deal. Those ones specifically said. And Shams' note was that hiccups came in terms of the Knicks and Raptors couldn't really agree.
I'm not surprised they couldn't agree. You also... how this got reported, I know Mike Scotto had it at one point as well, and I think Mark Stein whatever was being reported, it would have had to expand into a bigger framework because Cam Reddish couldn't have been aggregated again because he had just been traded. So like whatever was getting kicked around was either actually several smaller trades or one bigger trade that we didn't know all the details on. The Taylor Horton Tucker thing, like it's fine.
You took a flyer on a guy.
Yeah, look at what you just did with Gary Trent. And Gary Trent was good in Portland, but you look and it's like, hey, yeah, somewhere in our system, a guy can get a lot better, a lot quicker. And you look at what this core kind of lacks in terms of second unit presence, and Horton Tucker would be fine there. And yeah, if you were going to swap out Birch for Noel, who has a shorter contract, I think you'd be okay with the. I mean, they everyone loves Kem Birch as a dude, and I think a healthy Kem Birch
of course,
is good and useful. But I don't think they'd terribly mind a redo on that contract.
Sure, yeah. Shams also mentioned that the Lakers and Toronto might have discussed a separate deal that was just THD coming to Toronto and maybe some things moving back and forth. I'm not really sure how that contract really would have worked. I mean, I guess the expiring deal you're selling is Dragic, but I don't know. Or maybe that was the secondary deal that was potentially discussed in addition to the Thad move, which was also going to involve the Dragic contract. But ultimately, this is it's all water on the bridge. Of course, a lot of trades get discussed at that time of the year, and not all of it come to fruition. The Raptors get Thad, and the challenge now is sort of making it work before the end of the season. By the way, I did mention early in the show that Alex left the producer note here. We have officially booked Alvin Williams, for the Raptors show. I know
There you go.
There was some banter about it on the broadcast last night. Obviously, we're huge fans of Alvin. He can come on whenever he wants.
He's been on before. I don't know what all that was about.
He's also been on before twice. All right, Alex checked, but we will have him on Thursday. So that does it for us today. I'm your host, Will Lou, and you've been listening to The Raptors Show, powered by DoorDash on Sportsnet 590 The Fan. Make sure you find The Raptors Show wherever you listen to podcasts and subscribe, and please rate and review our show. A reminder, we are streaming live on Sportsnet's YouTube channel and on Sportsnet 360, Monday to Friday between 2 and 3 p.m. Thanks once again to Blake Murphy, to our board producer, Derek Bandale, to Jennifer Rolnick for helping us behind the scenes in the YouTube stream, and I will talk to you soon.